The sun was setting behind the towering skyscrapers of downtown, casting long shadows across the pristine office of Innovative Tech Solutions CEO. Ray Johnson hadn't moved from his leather chair for the past hour, his eyes fixed on the quarterly reports spread across his desk. The numbers didn't lie. While the company's profits were soaring, reaching heights that would make any investor smile, something was terribly wrong beneath the surface. He picked up the employee satisfaction survey, its pages now wrinkled from his constant reading and rereading. The graphs showed a steady decline in workplace happiness, with the steepest drops in departments he rarely visited. Ray remembered when he first started this company 15 years ago in his garage, with nothing but a dream and determination. Back then, he knew every employee's name, their families, their stories. Now, with over 5,000 employees across 3 buildings, he felt disconnected from the heart of his own creation. Running his fingers across his temple, Ray thought about his morning routine, the private elevator ride to the 50th floor, the perfectly brewed coffee waiting on his desk, the series of meetings where everyone nodded and smiled at his every word. When was the last time someone had told him the truth about what was really happening in his company? His eyes drifted to the framed magazine covers on his wall, 40 Under 40, Innovation Leader of the Year, Breaking Barriers in Tech. Each glossy cover showed his success story, the black entrepreneur who built a tech empire from scratch. But what good were these accolades if his own employees were suffering? The quiet hum of the office air conditioning was interrupted by a notification on his computer. Another resignation email, the third one this week. This time it was from the cybersecurity department, one of their brightest analysts leaving for a better opportunity. Ray opened his drawer and pulled out a small worn notebook. It was the same notebook where he'd written his first business plan, its pages now yellowed with age. Flipping to a blank page, he began to write. The idea had been forming in his mind for weeks, but now it crystallized with sudden clarity. He needed to see his company through different eyes, not as the CEO everyone feared or respected, but as just another employee trying to make it through the day. The risks were enormous. If word got out that the CEO was spying on his own company, the media would have a field day. The board would question his judgment. Competitors would use it against them. But as he looked at the resignation email again, Ray knew he had to act. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd need, a professional consulting firm specializing in corporate infiltration and identity transformation. The woman who answered sounded surprised when he explained what he wanted, but quickly recovered her professional composure. "Mr. Johnson, what you're suggesting is unusual," she said carefully, "but not impossible. We can create a new identity for you, complete with backstory and documentation. However, I must warn you, once you start this, you'll have to see it through. Any break in character could expose the entire operation." Ray looked at the family photo on his desk, his wife and 2 kids smiling back at him from their last vacation. He thought about the sacrifices they'd all made for him to reach this position, the countless missed dinners and weekends at the office. "I understand the risks," he replied firmly. "But sometimes you need to risk everything to save what matters most." After ending the call, Ray walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights were coming alive as dusk settled in, thousands of tiny squares of illumination representing thousands of lives, dreams, and stories. Somewhere in those buildings, other CEOs were probably looking at similar reports, making safe decisions, protecting their positions. But Ray had never taken the safe path. It wasn't how he built this company, and it wasn't how he would save it. He opened his calendar app and began clearing his schedule for the next 2 weeks. To his executive assistant, he would be taking a much-needed vacation. In reality, he would be embarking on the riskiest undercover operation of his life. As he typed, Ray felt a mix of excitement and fear that reminded him of his early startup days. Back then, every day had been an adventure, every decision a leap of faith. The cleaning staff was starting their evening rounds when Ray finally packed his briefcase. Tomorrow would be his last day as CEO for a while. As he walked toward his private elevator, he paused by the customer service department, already empty except for the night shift workers. Soon, he would be sitting in one of those cubicles, experiencing his company from ground zero. The thought both terrified and energized him. In the parking garage, Ray's fingerprint unlocked his Tesla's door. As he settled into the driver's seat, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at him was that of a successful CEO, confident, polished, respected. By this time next week, that face would be transformed, unrecognizable to even his closest colleagues. But somewhere beneath that new disguise would be the same person who started with nothing but a dream, ready to risk everything to make that dream right again. The transformation studio looked more like a movie set than a professional consulting office. Ray stood in front of a full-length mirror, barely recognizing the person staring back at him. Gone was his signature clean-shaven face, replaced by carefully crafted stubble. His usually well-maintained haircut had been altered to look slightly unkempt, like someone who couldn't afford regular visits to an upscale barbershop. The key to a successful undercover operation isn't just about changing your appearance, explained Dr. Chen, the transformation specialist. She circled around Ray, making minor adjustments to his posture. It's about becoming a different person entirely. You need to change how you walk, how you talk, even how you think. Ray watched as she pulled out a rack of clothes, nothing like the designer suits hanging in his closet at home. There were worn jeans, generic polo shirts, and scuffed shoes that looked like they'd seen better days. Each item had been carefully selected to create the image of someone just trying to make ends meet. Remember, Dr. Chen continued, you're no longer Ray Johnson, the CEO. You're Andrew Wilson, a guy who just moved to the city looking for a fresh start. You've got some basic tech knowledge from community college courses, but nothing fancy. You're eager to learn, but not too eager. That would draw attention. The next few hours were spent practicing his new walk. Ray had never realized how much his success showed in his stride, the confident gait, the straight shoulders, the way he naturally commanded space. Dr. Chen made him walk back and forth across the room countless times, correcting his posture until his steps showed just the right mix of capability and uncertainty. Your hands, she pointed out. They're too smooth. No entry-level tech worker has hands that have never seen manual labor. A specialist was brought in to apply supple calluses and rough patches to his palms. Another expert worked on aging his designer watch, replacing it with a simple digital timepiece that had seen better days. The hardest part was changing his speech patterns. Years of board meetings and media interviews had polished his vocabulary and delivery to perfection. Now he had to learn to speak with less authority, to add subtle hesitations, to avoid the business jargon that had become second nature. Listen to how you just asked for water, Dr. Chen pointed out. Would you mind getting me some water? That's CEO speak. Try again, more casual this time. Ray tried again and again until, hey, could I grab some water? Felt natural on his tongue. It was like learning a new language, but instead of foreign words, he was learning how to speak like someone who hadn't spent the last 15 years in executive meetings. By late afternoon, they moved on to his backstory. Every detail had to be memorable yet mundane enough not to invite too many questions. Andrew Wilson had grown up in a small town in Michigan, moved around a bit after high school, took some community college courses in computer science. He had an uncle in the city explaining his move, liked basketball but wasn't too knowledgeable about it, and was trying to finally settle into a stable career. The best lies are built on truth, Dr. Chen advised, helping him craft responses to common questions. Use real experiences from your past, just change the context. Remember that time you were nervous before your first investor meeting. That feeling can help you act nervous about your first day at a new job. The final touch was learning to use outdated technology. Ray's muscle memory went straight to the latest iPhone models and cutting-edge laptops. Andrew Wilson would be using a 3-year-old Android phone with a slightly cracked screen and whatever basic computer the company provided. As evening approached, Ray stood before the mirror one last time. The man looking back at him could have been any of thousands of people trying to make it in the city. His clothes were clean but not pristine, his appearance neat but not polished. Even his wedding ring had been replaced with a simple band that looked like it came from a department store. One last thing, Dr. Chen said, handing him a worn leather wallet. Inside was Andrew Wilson's life. A driver's license with his new photo, a debit card with a modest balance, a coffee shop loyalty card with 3 stamps. Remember, from the moment you leave this room, you're Andrew. Ray Johnson can't exist again until this is over. Ray, no, Andrew, picked up his new backpack, a far cry from his usual leather briefcase. Inside were a few basic supplies, a packed lunch in a reused plastic container, and a bus pass. His Tesla would stay in the garage for the next few weeks, replaced by public transportation and occasional ride-shares. As he prepared to leave, Dr. Chen grabbed his arm. "Whatever you discover out there," she said seriously, "remember that you can't react like a CEO. Andrew Wilson has no power to fix company policies or fire managers. He's just trying to get through each day like everyone else." Walking out of the building, Ray took his first steps as Andra. The evening crowd rushed past him, no one giving him a second glance. For the first time in years, he was invisible, just another face in the crowd. Tomorrow, he would walk into his own company as a stranger, ready to experience everything his employees lived through every day. The bus ride home felt surreal. Sitting on the worn plastic seat, watching the city lights blur past the window, Ray realized this might be the biggest gamble of his career. But as he looked around at his fellow passengers, tired faces returning from long days of work, he knew it might also be the most important thing he'd ever done. The morning rush at Innovative Tech Solutions felt completely different from the ground floor. Instead of his usual private elevator ride, Andra found himself squeezed into the main elevator with dozens of other employees, all clutching coffee cups and staring at their phones. Nobody looked up, nobody noticed him. The sensation was both liberating and unsettling. His orientation began at 9 a.m. sharp in a cramped conference room that smelled of old coffee and printer toner. The HR representative, Ms. Thompson, barely looked up from her tablet as she rushed through the standard procedures. Andra sat among 5 other new hires, all of them nodding along as she speed-read through company policies he had helped write years ago. "Customer service floor is level 12, Ms. Thompson announced, handing out security badges. "Your team leader will show you to your workstation. Remember, badges must be visible at all times." She glanced at her watch, clearly ready to move on to her next task. "Any questions?" Andra raised his hand, remembering Dr. Chen's coaching about showing the right amount of uncertainty. "What about the mentorship program? I read online that new employees get paired with experienced staff members." Ms. Thompson's laugh was quick and dismissive. That program was discontinued due to budget constraints. Now, if there are no other questions, she was already gathering her materials before finishing the sentence. The customer service floor was a maze of gray cubicles under harsh fluorescent lighting. Andra's team leader, Mr. Parker, was a middle-aged man with permanent frown lines who seemed to take pride in his position a little too seriously. "Bathroom breaks are limited to 5 minutes, Mr. Parker announced, leading them through the cubicle maze. "Anything longer requires supervisor approval. Lunch is exactly 30 minutes, not 31, not 32. We track all break times through the system." Andra glanced at his new colleagues' faces as they walked. Most wore expressions of resigned acceptance, but one woman couldn't hide her shock. She had probably come from a company with more reasonable policies. His workstation was wedged between a printer that made concerning noises and a water cooler that had seen better days. The computer looked like it belonged in a museum, and the chair squeaked protestingly when he sat down. "Training materials are on the shared drive," Mr. Parker said, already walking away. "Read them today, you start taking calls tomorrow. Remember, we track idle time." Throughout the morning, Andrew noticed patterns that made his stomach turn. The regional manager, Mr. Brooks, would walk through the floor periodically, making comments that masqueraded as jokes but carried clear undertones of bias. When Lee from accounting came up to fix someone's expense report, Mr. Brooks loudly asked if she could also help him with his taxes. When Dev from it arrived to handle a system issue, he was interrupted 3 times with questions about curry recipes. During his lunch break, Andrew sat in the break room, picking at a sandwich while observing the informal groups that formed. The room had an invisible line down the middle. Senior staff claimed the tables near the windows, while newer employees and support staff huddled near the vending machines. He watched as a young woman named Nia presented an idea about improving the customer callback system. Her suggestion was practical and could potentially save hours of work. But before she could finish, she was talked over by a senior team member who presented almost the exact same idea 10 minutes later to widespread praise. The afternoon brought more revelations. Andrew overheard two managers discussing the upcoming diversity training in the copy room. "Just another box to tick," one said, rolling his eyes. "HR needs to show the higher-ups we're being progressive." They laughed, not noticing Andrew by the scanner. The breaking point came near the end of the day. One of his fellow new hires, a woman wearing a headscarf, asked about a quiet space for prayer. Mr. Parker's response was telling. "We're running a business here, not a community center. You'll need to handle that on your own time." As Andrew packed up his bag at 5:30, his mind was spinning. He had expected to find some issues. Every company had room for improvement. But this was different. This was systematic. The problems weren't just in policies or procedures. They were woven into the daily fabric of workplace life. On the bus ride home, he opened his notes app, carefully documenting everything he'd observed. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed. As CEO, he had always prided himself on running a progressive, inclusive company. He had won awards for workplace culture. But now he realized those awards were based on policies that looked good on paper but meant nothing in practice. The real company culture lived in the quick exchanges, the casual comments, the silent boundaries that divided people as surely as physical walls. It lived in the resigned expressions of employees who had learned to keep their heads down, in the confident smirks of managers who knew they could get away with anything as long as it wasn't explicitly against policy. Looking out the bus window at the darkening city, Andrew felt the weight of his discovery settling onto his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, he was sure. But for now, he had to resist the urge to pull out his CEO phone and start firing people on the spot. He had to remember his role. He was Andrew Wilson, powerless new hire, just trying to make it through training week. As he got off at his stop, he passed a group of his new colleagues waiting for their bus. They nodded at him with the weary solidarity of people sharing the same daily grind. Little did they know that their simple gesture carried more truth than any executive report he ever read. Day 2 as Andrew started with a surprising encounter in the lobby. He arrived early, hoping to observe the morning dynamics before most employees showed up. The security guard, an older man named Mr. Washington, was helping a young employee who seemed upset. "They changed my shift without telling me," the employee was saying, wiping tears from her eyes. "I'm a single mom. I can't just switch my childcare schedule overnight. When I told Mr. Parker, he said I should be grateful to have a job at all." Andrew watched as Mr. Washington handed her a tissue. "Listen, child," he said gently, "I've been here 12 years. Things weren't always like this. This company used to care about its people. Now," he shook his head sadly, "just document everything. One day, someone upstairs will notice what's happening down here." The irony of those words hit Andrew like a physical blow. He was that someone upstairs, and he hadn't noticed. Not really. The morning team meeting brought more revelations. Andrew sat at the back of the conference room, watching as Mr. Brooks, the regional manager, conducted what he called a performance review session. It felt more like a public shaming. "Our numbers are down this quarter," Mr. Brooks announced, pulling up a spreadsheet on the projector. "Some of you aren't pulling your weight." He started calling out names and statistics, his tone growing more condescending with each one. When he reached Crystal's stats, his demeanor changed noticeably. "Now, Crystal here needs to understand that this is a professional environment." He gestured toward the young woman, who sat straighter in her chair. "Your enthusiasm is appreciated, but perhaps tone it down a bit. We have a certain image to maintain." Andrew noticed Crystal's fingers tighten around her pen. Her stats were among the highest on the screen, but instead of praise, she was being told to change who she was. The message was clear. Success wasn't enough if you didn't fit the right mold. During a coffee break, Andrew accidentally discovered something that made his blood run cold. He was searching for budget reports on the shared drive, part of his training task, when he clicked on the wrong folder. There, in plain sight, was a spreadsheet titled Compensation_Review_2024. The file shouldn't have been accessible to entry-level employees, but someone had forgotten to set the proper permissions. Andrew's eyes scanned the data, his CEO's mind automatically analyzing the patterns. The salary discrepancies were glaring. Employees with similar qualifications and experience showed wildly different compensation rates. The pattern wasn't random. "Hey, new guy." Mr. Parker's voice made him jump. That drive is for training materials only. Stick to your assigned folders. He reached over Andrew's shoulder and closed the window, but the damage was done. Andrew had seen enough to know this wasn't just about unconscious bias. This was systematic. Lunch brought another disturbing scene. Andrew sat with a group of tech support staff, hoping to learn more about their daily experiences. The conversation turned to the upcoming company-wide innovation contest. "Don't bother entering," said one of the veterans, pushing away his half-eaten sandwich. "I submitted an idea last year. A way to reduce server response time by 40%. 2 months later, I saw my exact proposal being implemented, but guess who got credit? Mr. Brooks's nephew, who'd been here all of 3 weeks. The afternoon took an even darker turn. Andrew was photocopying training documents when he overheard 2 senior managers in the adjacent break room. They were discussing the recent push for more inclusive hiring. "It's all for show," one said, lowering his voice but not enough. "We hire them because it looks good in the reports, but everyone knows how to keep the real decision-making positions selective." "Yeah, we learned our lesson after they'd promoted that one guy to VP last year," the other replied. "Started asking too many questions about equitable practices and systemic changes. Thankfully, he took that offer from the competition." Andrew remembered that VP. He had been genuinely excited about his ideas for company reform. He'd assumed the man left for better opportunities. Now he wondered how many others had been quietly pushed out for trying to make real change. By the end of the day, Andrew felt physically ill. Every interaction he observed seemed to reveal a new layer of problems. It wasn't just about unfair treatment or bias. It was about a corporate culture that had grown toxic while hiding behind polished PR statements and diversity awards. On his bus ride home, Andrew opened his notes app again, but his hands were shaking too much to type. Instead, he hit the voice recorder button and spoke quietly into his phone, documenting everything while it was fresh in his mind. Other passengers probably thought he was leaving himself reminders, but he was really recording evidence that would soon shake the company to its core. As the bus wound through the city streets, Andrew thought about Mr. Washington's words from that morning. Someone upstairs needed to notice what was happening down here. Well, someone had noticed. And tomorrow would be his last day of watching silently. The morning of his final Undercover day began with a company-wide team meeting. Andrew arrived early, choosing a seat near the back where he could observe everything. The large conference room slowly filled with employees from different departments, their faces showing varying degrees of resignation. They'd been through these meetings before. Mr. Brooks stood at the front, a PowerPoint presentation glowing behind him. The title slide read Quarterly Performance Review and Innovation Updates. Andrew noticed how the senior managers clustered together on one side of the room, while junior staff and support teams spread out along the edges, maintaining an invisible boundary. "Before we begin," Mr. Brooks announced, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness that set everyone's teeth on edge. "I want to congratulate Team A on their exceptional performance this quarter. Led by Robert, they've shown us what real professionalism looks like." Andrew watched as Robert, a recent hire with barely 6 months of experience, stood up to accept the praise. Meanwhile, Crystal's team had actually outperformed everyone else. Andrew had seen the real numbers in the shared drive. But Crystal sat quietly, her face carefully neutral as she took notes. The meeting took a turn when they reached the Innovation Showcase segment. A young programmer named Aisha raised her hand to present her team's new customer service algorithm. She had barely started explaining the technical specifications when Mr. Brooks interrupted. "Let's keep things simple," he said, his condescending smile never wavering. "We don't want to confuse anyone with too many technical details." Aisha persisted professionally. "The algorithm reduces response time by 60% while improving accuracy. We've tested it across multiple scenarios and—" "Thank you, that's enough," Mr. Brooks cut in again, moving on to Robert's presentation about streamlining our email system. Andrew watched as Robert presented virtually the same concept, using simpler terms and taking credit for ideas that had clearly come from Aisha's team. The room's reaction was telling. Senior managers nodded approvingly, while junior staff exchanged knowing looks. During the coffee break, Andrew overheard a conversation that made his stomach turn. Two senior managers were discussing the upcoming leadership training program. "We need to be careful about who we nominate this year," one said, stirring his coffee. "Last year's group got a bit too diverse. Started giving HR all sorts of ideas about inclusive workplace practices." "Don't worry," the other replied with a chuckle. "I've already spoken to the selection committee. We're keeping things traditional this time." Back at his desk, Andrew found himself processing customer complaints that painted an even darker picture. One email described how a customer service representative had been dismissive of an elderly client's concerns. Another detailed how a technical support call had been handled with clear cultural insensitivity. The afternoon brought the final straw. Andrew was copying reports when he witnessed an interaction between Mr. Brooks and a talented analyst named Chen. Chen had prepared a comprehensive market analysis that highlighted several critical issues in their current strategy. "While your dedication is appreciated," Mr. Brooks said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "I think you might be more comfortable handling data entry for now. These high-level analyses require a certain cultural understanding of our market." Chen's face remained professional, but Andrew saw his hands trembling as he gathered his papers. 10 years of experience and a master's degree reduced to data entry because he supposedly lacked cultural understanding. The day's team meeting was the breaking point. Andrew sat through an hour of watching qualified employees being talked over, their ideas dismissed or appropriated. He watched as Mr. Brooks praised mediocre suggestions from his favorite employees while ignoring innovative solutions from others. A young developer named Pryor presented a brilliant security upgrade proposal. Her presentation was flawless, backed by solid research and clear data. Mr. Brooks let her finish this time, but his response was crushing. "That's an interesting perspective," he said, emphasizing the word in a way that made it clear he meant the opposite. "But I think we'll go with Tyler's suggestion from last week. It's more aligned with our company culture." Andrew looked around the room, seeing the same story written on face after face. Some showed quiet resignation, others carefully concealed anger, but all shared a common thread. They had learned to expect this treatment, to accept it as normal. On his bus ride home that evening, Andrew didn't bother with notes. Everything he'd seen was burned into his memory. He thought about all the talented people being held back, all the innovation being stifled, all the potential being wasted. He thought about how his company's values, the ones he had personally written, had become nothing more than empty words on a website. As the city lights blurred past his window, Andrew made his decision. Tomorrow, Ray Johnson would return, but he wouldn't be the same CEO who had left his office a week ago. He had seen too much, learned too much, to go back to business as usual. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to his executive assistant, "Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. All members must attend in person, no exceptions." The other passengers on the bus had no idea they were sitting next to a CEO who was about to turn his company upside down. To them, he was just another tired worker heading home after a long day. But in his mind, Ray was already planning the biggest shake-up in his company's history. Tomorrow would be his last day as Andrew Wilson, but it would also be the last day for a lot of other people at Innovative Tech Solutions, people who had turned his dream of an inclusive, innovative company into a nightmare of discrimination and suppressed potential. The next morning, the executive floor of Innovative Tech Solutions buzzed with unusual energy. Board members arrived early, confused by the urgent summons. They clustered in small groups, whispering theories about why CEO Ray Johnson had suddenly returned from his vacation and called an emergency meeting. Ray stood in his private bathroom, carefully removing the last traces of Andrew Wilson. The makeup that had altered his appearance washed away, revealing the face everyone knew. But the eyes in the mirror were different now, harder, more determined. He straightened his tie, a gesture that felt strange after a week of casual clothes, and checked his phone one last time. At exactly 9 a.m., Ray walked into the boardroom. The familiar faces turned to him with welcoming smiles that froze when they saw his expression. Without a word, he connected his laptop to the projector and dimmed the lights. "Before we begin," Ray said, his voice carrying the authority that Andrew had carefully hidden, "I want you to watch something." He pressed play on a compilation of video recordings he'd secretly made during his week undercover. The screen came to life with scene after scene of workplace discrimination, harassment, and toxic management. The board members' expressions changed as they watched Mr. Brooks dismissing qualified employees, senior managers joking about diversity initiatives, talent being systematically suppressed. Some looked shocked, others uncomfortable, and a few, Ray noted carefully, seemed more annoyed at being exposed than disturbed by what they were seeing. For the past week, Ray continued when the video ended, "I've worked as Andrew Wilson, a new hire in our customer service department." He let that sink in, watching the realization spread across their faces. What you just saw isn't some isolated incident. It's not a few bad apples. It's our company culture. The culture we've allowed to grow while we sat in our comfortable offices, congratulating ourselves on our diversity awards. He pulled out a stack of documents, printouts of the discriminatory salary spreadsheets, screenshots of inappropriate messages, detailed notes of every incident he'd witnessed. "We have a cancer in this company," he said, his voice firm, "and today we're going to cut it out." Ray clicked to the next slide, displaying a list of names. Mr. Brooks, our regional manager, who has been systematically suppressing talented employees based on their background. Another click. Linda Thompson from HR, who has been complicit in covering up discrimination complaints. Click. Senior managers who have turned our promotion system into their personal playground. The boardroom erupted in protests. "You can't just fire people without proper procedure," one board member objected. "Think about the legal implications." Ray held up a hand, silencing the room. "Every termination is fully documented and legally sound. I spent the night with our legal team, reviewing each case. But more importantly," he leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of his experience, "think about the moral implications of not acting." He played another video. Crystal presenting her innovative customer service solution, only to be talked over and dismissed. Then Robert presenting the same idea minutes later to widespread praise. "This is happening every day," Ray said. "We're not just losing talent, we're crushing spirits. We're telling brilliant minds they're not good enough because they don't look like us, talk like us, come from the same places as us." A senior board member cleared his throat. "Ray, while these incidents are unfortunate, perhaps we're overreacting. Every company has some issues with." "Every company has issues," Ray cut in, his voice sharp. "But we're not every company. We're supposed to be different. That's what I promised when I started this company. That's what we put in our mission statement. That's what we tell the world we stand for." He clicked to another slide, the company's original mission statement, written 15 years ago in his garage. "We believe in innovation through inclusion. We believe talent can come from anywhere. We believe in judging people by their abilities, not their appearances." Those weren't just pretty words to me, Ray continued, his voice softer now. They were a promise. A promise I made to every person who joined this company. And this week, I saw how thoroughly we've broken that promise. He stood up, straightening to his full height. "As of this morning, the following people are terminated." He read through the list: 3 vice presidents, 5 senior managers including Mr. Brooks, and several other managers who had been key players in the toxic culture. "Their responsibilities will be temporarily distributed among our remaining leadership team," Ray announced. "And here's the interesting part. We're going to refill these positions internally. Remember Crystal, whose ideas kept getting stolen? She's our new regional manager. Chen, who was told he lacked cultural understanding. He's taking over market analysis. Aisha, whose technical expertise was dismissed. She's leading our new innovation team." The boardroom was silent now, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Ray clicked to his final slide. A new organizational chart showing the promoted employees in their new positions. "Some of you might be wondering why I didn't fire everyone involved in this system," Ray said, looking around the room. "Because some people deserve a chance to learn and change. But make no mistake, this is your only chance. From today, every employee will be judged by their actions, their abilities, and nothing else." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I built this company from nothing because I believed talent could come from anywhere. I believed innovation needs diverse voices. I believed in giving everyone a fair chance. Somewhere along the way, we lost those beliefs. Today, we're taking them back." The room remained silent as Ray gathered his materials. The HR team is already delivering termination notices. Security is escorting people out. By lunch, the news will be all over the building. And by tomorrow morning, every employee will know that things have changed at Innovative Tech Solutions. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. One more thing. Mr. Washington, our security guard, the one who's been here 12 years, watching everything fall apart. He's our new head of employee relations. Because sometimes the person who sees everything from the ground floor knows more than all of us in our corner offices combined. 6 months after the day that shook Innovative Tech Solutions to its core, Ray stood in the lobby watching the morning rush. The energy was different now. People walked with purpose rather than resignation, conversations flowed freely, and smiles seemed genuine rather than forced. Mr. Washington, now Director of Employee Relations, stood beside him. His security guard uniform had been replaced by a well-fitted suit, but he still insisted on greeting employees every morning. Quite a change from 6 months ago, he said, nodding toward a group of developers excitedly discussing their latest project. "Tell me about it," Ray replied, thinking back to those first chaotic weeks after the mass firing. The media had descended like wolves, industry analysts had predicted disaster, and competitors had tried to poach their top talent. But something unexpected had happened instead. Crystal, the new regional manager, had transformed the customer service department. Gone were the rigid break times and surveillance systems. Instead, she implemented flexible schedules and a peer support program. Customer satisfaction scores had shot up 40% in the first quarter. In the tech division, Aisha's team had finally been unleashed to innovate freely. Their new service algorithm, the one that had been dismissed 6 months ago, was now generating buzz throughout the industry. 3 major companies had already licensed the technology. Chen's market analysis team had opened up new opportunities nobody had even considered before. By actually listening to diverse perspectives, they'd identified untapped markets and customer needs that the previous management had been blind to. Ray walked toward the elevator, remembering how different this journey had felt as Andra. Now, employees smiled and waved, stopping him to share ideas or updates. The invisible barriers that had divided the workspace had dissolved. The morning team meeting looked nothing like the ones he'd witnessed undercover. The large conference room had been redesigned with round tables instead of rows, encouraging collaboration. People from different departments mixed freely, sharing insights across traditional boundaries. "Our quarterly numbers are in," announced Lai, the new head of finance. She clicked through slides showing dramatic improvements across all metrics. But more importantly, look at these employee satisfaction scores. The graph showed a steep upward trend. Retention rates had improved by 60%, sick days had dropped by 45%, and productivity had increased across all departments. But the most telling statistics were the ones that couldn't be graphed: the number of innovative ideas being generated, the collaboration across teams, the energy in the office. After the meeting, Ray took the stairs down to the tech floor, something he'd started doing regularly since his week as Andra. He passed Pryor's team, now occupying a prime corner space where they were developing the company's next generation of security protocols. The same protocols that had been dismissed 6 months ago were now being hailed as industry-leading innovations. In the break room, he overheard a conversation that made him smile. 2 senior developers were arguing passionately about a technical problem, while a junior employee confidently jumped in with a solution neither had considered. Nobody talked over her or dismissed her idea. Instead, they immediately pulled up a whiteboard and started mapping out her suggestion. Back in his office, Ray reviewed the latest industry reports. Innovative Tech Solutions had not only survived the shakeup but was thriving. Their stock price had initially dipped when the news broke, but had since climbed to record highs. More importantly, they were attracting top talent from across the industry. People who wanted to work somewhere their ideas would be heard, regardless of who they were. The afternoon brought a visit from a journalism student working on a story about corporate culture transformation. "What made you take such a dramatic step?" she asked, recorder in hand. Ray thought carefully before answering. "You know, it's easy to sit in a corner office and believe everything's fine. It's easy to look at diversity statistics and think you've solved the problem. But real change requires really seeing." He showed her the notebook he used as Andra, now framed on his wall alongside the company's original mission statement. Sometimes you have to become someone else to remember who you really are. The day ended with a company-wide celebration. They'd just been named one of the top workplaces in the country. But this time, the award meant something because it reflected reality, not just paperwork. As employees gathered in the lobby, sharing cake and stories, Ray noticed something remarkable. The invisible lines that had once divided people were gone. Teams mixed freely, ideas flowed across departments, and laughter echoed through the space. Mr. Washington appeared at his side again. "Remember what I told that young woman 6 months ago? About how someone upstairs needed to see what was happening down here?" Ray nodded, smiling. "Sometimes the view from the top isn't the clearest one." And sometimes, Mr. Washington added, the biggest changes start with someone willing to step down and really look. As the sun set outside the tall windows, casting long shadows across the celebrating employees, Ray thought about his journey from CEO to under and back again. The company he'd built had lost its way, but by becoming someone else, someone powerless, he'd found the power to set it right again. "You know what the real change is?" Mr. Washington said, gesturing to the crowd. "It's not the numbers or the awards. It's that people come to work now believing they can be anything, because they saw their CEO become nobody to make everybody somebody." Ray looked around at his transformed company, at Crystal leading a strategy discussion, at Chen presenting market projections, at Aisha debugging code with her team. Each of them had always been capable of greatness. They just needed someone to tear down the walls holding them back. "Ready for tomorrow?" Mr. Washington asked. Ray smiled, thinking of all the new ideas, innovations, and possibilities each day now brought. "More ready than ever," he replied, because now he knew, really knew, that the view from the ground floor was just as important as the view from the top.